a good time to repeat a shape, or when is it better to maybe change it up? In this video, we are going to explore the interior design element of shape through the lens of the interior design principles of rhythm and emphasis. And we are going to find out examples of when it may be helpful to repeat a shape, but on the other side of that, when it may be better to maybe change things up and use a different shape. And first thing, let's just talk about the interior design elements and what those are. The interior design elements can be thought of as almost tools that we use to create the look and feel that we want. And those include things like color and line and texture. And in this video, we are talking about shape. And then the interior design principles are a guide for us to keep in mind, to follow, so that our design choices and our designs are successful. And we are talking about the interior design principle of rhythm, which includes the interior design principles of repetition and contrast. And the interior design principle of rhythm is all about movement. And we can think of that is the same thing in music, creating some movement in a song. Well, in our homes, in interior design, it's creating movement in a visual way. Repetition helps to create a certain flow to a room. It helps to guide our eyes around a room, or even just grabbing our attention throughout our home so that we have a sense of flow and connectedness. Then the other type of rhythm is contrast, and that's where we want to kind of interrupt that repetitive sort of rhythm and just to change things up a bit so that things become a little bit more interesting. Then the interior design principle of emphasis is all about creating almost a hierarchy of how much something is grabbing our attention. A really good example of this is a focal area, because this is an area of emphasis where we want it to grab our attention, maybe more than other areas in the room. So when we are talking about the interior design element of shape, there are a couple things to keep in mind. And here are some examples of when it may be a good idea to repeat the same shape in an area or a room, or even in our entire home. One of the first reasons why it may be a good idea to repeat a shape is if that shape will use the space more efficiently. A good example of this is when we are looking to buy a new dining table, whether it's for a dining room or dining area. And when we look for a dining table shape that matches or repeats the shape in the room or the area where we are going to place that table, where repeating that shape of the room uses the space more efficiently. And it makes sense to our eyes when we get that subtle sense that the dining room table makes sense with the shape of that room. Another example of this would just be an area rug. So if we have a rectangular shaped living room, in many ways it makes sense to choose an area rug that is also in a rectangular shape. And we are talking about using the space efficiently, so we're not wasting any space. And when we see that the area rug is repeating or matching the shape of the living room, that makes sense to our eye. Or on the other side of that, if we are taking a look at a furniture arrangement, say in our living room, whether that's a sofa and chairs and a coffee table and everything else that might be in a living room furniture arrangement, or even in our bedroom, or even a dining room table arrangement. When we look at that entire grouping, that entire arrangement as one entire element, we may want to choose a rug that is the same shape as that entire grouping. because repeating that shape makes sense with that shape of that entire arrangement, as well as it's saving space and using the space wisely. Another reason to repeat a shape is if it helps us to grab onto something familiar that will help to guide our eyes throughout an area or through one area to another area. And a good example of this would be our design style. And when we have a design style in mind, whether that's a contemporary style where we use certain shapes that represent that style. And so maybe in a very contemporary modern style, the shapes in general that we use are very linear compared to shapes that we may use maybe in a more traditional style where maybe they're more rounded. And this is where we'd want to create almost a background of these shapes that would guide our eyes from room to room and area to area and pull our entire home together. This is where we would want to repeat the shapes of a modern design style or a traditional design style in our architectural lighting, such as the lighting that we have hardwired into our rooms, such as a chandelier in the ceiling or a sconce on a wall. Or it could be the hardware that we have on our doors and cabinets, or even our plumbing fixtures. All of those different types of elements that are kind of in the background, but also help to connect everything in our home in a consistent way. That's where we would want to think about repeating a shape throughout our home. And another example of where we may want to repeat a shape is to refer to the architectural style of our home and to repeat certain details that are happening in our home so that all of the different elements that we bring into our home, that we add into our home, work with the architecture of our home. So an example of that is if we have a home where we have arched doorways or arched openings or arched windows, as in this example, it might be nice to kind of repeat that sort of circular or roundish style of shape in other elements that we bring into the room or the home, where it may make sense to choose certain types of furniture that has a more rounded profile to it, or even lighting that has a more rounded profile to it. And just in this subtle way, we are repeating those rounded shapes in the home, and it helps to tie everything together. And then when would it be a good idea to think about changing a shape and not repeating the same shape? And this is really important to notice because we want to make sure that when we are repeating a shape, that it's not too much, it's not too predictable or too on the nose. And if it is, that's maybe a signal to us to maybe change things up a bit. This is important when we are talking about a grouping of, say, different pieces of furniture or a grouping of different elements that coordinate together. They create an entire grouping or arrangement. An example of this is a dining room table and an area rug. And both of those elements create one entire look or one entire arrangement or grouping. And when we, say, have a round dining room table and we have a round circular rug underneath that dining room table, we may want to think about if it's just too much repetition, because then what we see are just round shapes everywhere. And this may be an opportunity to add a square rug instead, just to kind of change things up a bit within that entire grouping. It may be a classic move to choose a round circular shaped rug to go with a round table, but to change things up just a bit and be more intentional about creating some variety, it might be nice just to change it up just a bit to add a contrasting shape to that area rug to create some variety within that entire grouping. Or maybe we are looking for a new coffee table for our living room. Well, maybe it might be nice to change things up a bit. If we think about it, a sofa is a very rectangular type of form, and form is just the three-dimensional friend of shape. And when we want to create some contrast and create a little bit of variety happening within that living room furniture arrangement, maybe we can look for a round coffee table or even an oval coffee table that will give us that rectangular feel, but just with a more rounded look. So far, we've been looking through the lens of the interior design principle of rhythm and talking about contrast and repetition and when to use both of those. But if we talk about the interior design principle of emphasis, this is where we would want to use shape in a way where it would help to grab our attention. That could be in a focal area. Maybe we're using a different shape in a focal area just to grab our attention. Or maybe in an area of a room, we are using a shape in a different way or in a different size. Or lots of times when we are talking about pattern and we use a shape on a pattern, then that way that is going to grab our attention more. Just as in this example with the draperies on that wall where it has this circular shape pattern, floral motif pattern. Well, that pattern is drawing our attention because there aren't any other patterns in this area. And it's using a shape that may not be used in other areas of the room. So right away, those draperies help us to grab our attention first before we look in other areas of the room. And when would it be a good idea to use both repetition and contrast, where we do also change things up? Well, this is basically all of the time, because in our home, in our rooms, we always want to try to create some sort of balance so that everything isn't all the same, but then also that everything isn't contrasting so much that nothing is tied in together. So this is important to think about when you are looking to buy something new for a room. We talked about a sofa. Well, if we want to buy maybe a contrasting shape or form of a coffee table, that might be nice. Or if you have a lot of round circular shapes in a room, maybe it would be nice to add a new element or piece of furniture or accessory that would be in a more linear or rectangular shape or square shape, just to kind of help to change things up. And even when you are redoing a room, take some time to think about repetition and contrast when you are working with shapes. You may have a dominant shape that you use throughout that room, but be sure to bring in some contrast by mixing it up and bringing in different shapes as well. So please let me know if you have any questions about this topic and anything else that you can add to what we can think about when we are thinking about repetition and contrast and when to repeat a shape and when to change things up. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time when we discover more neat things about interior design. Take care.